What I want to do is talk about how it's possible to create what I call an entrepreneurial revolution, a revolution in entrepreneurship in a society such as BioBio, how to move the needle of entrepreneurship from one point to another point, not in a very long 20 to 30 year period, but in 3 or 4 or 5 years. That may sound a bit crazy, but the history of entrepreneurship is taking on big challenges and accomplishing them. And I really like what Cristobal said earlier about pensar grande. I think that's extremely important, and it's a theme that I'll come back to over and over again. But first, I want to put us in context. We live in a world that actually presents some very interesting new situation, especially for people here in Chile. The world is turning itself upside down. What existed before is not what's going to exist in the future. And the real question is whether these new changes, which are no less dramatic than the shifting of the tectonic plates that cause a terremoto, they're causing an economic terremoto, which has, as we heard from the Intendenta, both challenges but also opportunities. You see that amazing amounts of growth taking place in certain areas, certain countries in Latin America. Are these threats or opportunities? They're not only opportunities, because for the same customer that you're going to be looking for, there are going to be other suppliers, competitors looking for that same customer. There are going to be more and more of those. By the way, how many of you consider yourselves to be emprendedores? That's a fantastic. I think we finished our project. We can go home. No, we're not ready to go home yet. Those of 75 or 80 or 90 of you who raised your hands, from you and from the times 10 that exist out there in BioBio, we're going to try and create, we're going to do everything that we can to create an entrepreneurial revolution here in BioBio. We're going to try to pensar grande. Another tectonic shift in the world. There are huge players that 10 years ago didn't exist. China being one of them. I'm sure you feel it yourselves. I'm sure you see it yourselves. That creates new threats and new opportunities as well. There are changes in the United States, still the biggest market in the world, the biggest single market in the world. In many ways, the U.S. market is still the Olympics of marketing, but it's changing as well. There's a huge increase in Hispanization in the United States. Is that an opportunity or threat for you here in Chile? So with that as backdrop, well, there's another one. It's the U.S. economy. It's not only the U.S. economy, by the way, that's been busting. And I think despite the fact that President Obama and others are saying that the recovery is well underway, I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure. I'm not as optimistic as they are. But certainly that economic boom seems very different depending on who you are. The economic bust seems very different depending on who you are. So with that as a backdrop, what I want to do is talk a little bit about entrepreneurship. I want to talk about the kinds of entrepreneurship that is going to change the world. And I want to ask you to think in your own minds just for 1 minute. 1 minute of silence. I want to hear the thinking. Who are the entrepreneurs out there today, or in the last 10 years, who have changed or are changing the world? Who are those great entrepreneurs that exist out there? Just think. Are they these people? Most likely, the ones that came to your minds. And I think that some of you will recognize every single person on this picture. This is Steve Jobs, right? This is Bill Gates, obviously Facebook. You know who that is? The guy who made this, FedEx. Richard Branson, the Google guys, Jeff Bezos, Meg Whitman, and Pierre Omidyar. So are these the entrepreneurs who are going to change the world? Or are these guys and gals going to be the entrepreneurs who are going to change the world? Does anybody recognize a single person in this picture? Anybody? Does anybody know any one of these entrepreneurs? Well, with the exception of Desmond Tutu here. He's not the entrepreneur. He's giving an award to an entrepreneur. We don't recognize a single one of these faces. But what I'm going to tell you today is that it's not these guys who are going to change the world and bring the revolution about. It's them. And I'll tell you some stories, about 6 or 7 of them, which will make you realize the kind of revolution that this kind of entrepreneurship can bring about, and can bring about here in BioBio, in Concepcion, and in Chile. This is what I call accessible entrepreneurship. This is what I call the entrepreneurship of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Of normal people doing abnormal things. This is the kind of entrepreneurship that every one of you who raised your hands can do, because what it depends on is not your name, and not whether you're rich, and not the contacts or connections that you have. Those things help. I've been an entrepreneur for 15 years. I know what the real world is like. Those things can help. But what really makes the difference, what really lets you pensar a grande, pensar is what happens between your ears. And that's something that everybody has. So with that, what I want to do is talk about the reality of entrepreneurship, the accessible entrepreneurship, the entrepreneurship that we can do, and the implications of that. So let me start with a few examples. And again, what I'll do is give 6 or maybe 7 examples of entrepreneurs, and these are people that I've known very well, in fact. One of them, not too far from here, is a group of 3 students from Mexico who graduated, I don't like to be that far away. These are 3 people, 3 young Harvard Business School graduates. 2 of them were from Mexico, 1 from Canada, who decided the day after they graduated from the Harvard Business School to set up a new business in Mexico. And what it was called Cinemex. Probably none of you has heard of Cinemex. The Mafia del Cine. And the problem that they tried to address was what they called the problem of a brick and a stick. 15 years ago, when you went to the cinema, I assume that a lot of you go to the cinema here in Concepcion, although probably more download videos now into your system directly. But in those days, when you went to the cinema, you brought a brick and a stick. You brought a brick to sit on, and you brought a stick in order to beat away the rats. That was the experience in 1994 and 1995 in Mexico City, when these 3 young guys just fresh out of Harvard Business School, decided to set up a venture to completely revolutionize the cinematic experience in Mexico City. And they did it in a context in which the cinemas were completely unionized. You had a separate union for the people giving coffee. You had a separate union for the people giving Coke. You had a separate union for the people giving popcorn. A separate union for the people giving tickets. The tickets, by the way, the price was set by the government. The price of tickets was set by the government very low because the government thought that the way to keep people happy and keep them from creating trouble for the government was to give them cheap entertainment at night, keep them off the streets. So they made ticket prices low. And in that environment, which included horrible food and very uncomfortable other arrangements, bad quality video or film, these guys decided to do something completely different. They copied from the United States and Canada a model of cinematic experience that in the United States was very well known and very well developed. It was multi-screen cinema. I assume that you have it here now too. It's swept the world. When you go to a cinema, you have a choice. Maybe 6, 7, 8, 10 movies you can choose from. Usually in a nice mall. The seats are nice. The food is good. The service is pleasant. The quality of the video is great. Maybe stereo. It has the best technology. That's what they brought from the United States and Canada into Mexico. And by the way, not only was it air conditioned, but it's more expensive. The tickets were more expensive, 3, 4, 5 times more expensive. And what they did is they took the best practices from every cinema in the United States and copied it into Mexico City. The only thing they changed was instead of putting butter on the popcorn, they put lime juice and chili on the popcorn. That's what they did. And of course, they had excellent execution. And the results were, they survived the crash of 1995. Many of you probably remember that when the currency was devalued by 50% overnight in Mexico. They survived the crash. In fact, that actually helped them because they just raised $21 million a few weeks before the crash. They'd raised $21 million, they had it in the bank, and all of their competitors fled. The big US chains that were thinking of coming into Mexico City closed down their operation, and instead of doing the same thing themselves, they saw it as an opportunity because they could get cheap and easy access to very good real estate in the best malls, for example. And within just a few years, they had 50% of the market. They actually grew the market. And again, they're doing this with higher prices, significantly higher prices. They grew the market, 50% market share, 48 cinemas in 10 years. Those are big developments. And they sold out to a large Lowe's cinema, a big international chain. They sold out in 2005, I believe, 2002 rather, for $300 million. $300 million. They made some money along the way. One of them stayed, one of the 3 stayed, and managed it for a few more years, and then he left as well. So keep that in mind, and I'll give you another example from a very different part of the world in a very different kind of business. And this is a company called Racing the Planet. I think you'll find this interesting because it actually touches on Chile in an interesting way. Racing the Planet was established by a woman in Hong Kong named Mary Gadders. She was a fanatic for running marathons. Does anybody here run a marathon? Does anybody here run a marathon? Oh, come on. I saw a hand there. You're lying. Those of you who have your hand, I'm sure that some of you have run marathons ever. 10K? 5K? 10K? There are a few. do it? Why? It's good exercise, it feels good. What Mary Gaddens has done is created a business to stage ultra marathons. You said you run a 10K, that's 10,000 meters or 10 kilometers. She stages ultra marathons that are 250 kilometers. That's 25. Sounds exciting? You get in really good shape if you finish one of these. But not only does she do it, it takes a week, by the way, a week to do the 250-kilometer marathon that she runs in Racing the Planet. But she stages them in the most hostile environments in the world. She runs them in the Sahara Desert in Egypt. She runs them in the Gobi Desert in Mongolia. She runs them in the Atacama Desert here in Chile every year. And then, if you're successful in running in the Atacama and Gobi and Sahara, you have the privilege of running 250 kilometers in a desert that's even further south called Antarctica. Turns out, I didn't know this. You probably know this because you're closer than I am. Antarctica is a desert because it doesn't have much rain, it doesn't have much precipitation. It's very dry. I never knew that. Now, why is she doing this? Why is Mary Gaddens doing this? Is she doing this because she wants to make money from the people who will pay? By the way, they pay $3,000 each. Every participant pays for $3,000. 6 months in advance. Interesting business model. They pay her $3,000 6 months in advance. 200 participants per race. Do the numbers. That's $600,000 of financing that she has for working capital for 6 months. Free. Free. Actually, she can actually earn the interest on it. So what is she doing? Does anybody here have something called North Face clothing? North Face clothing? Yes, let me just see the hands. North Face. Does anybody here have Patagonia clothing? I imagine more would have Patagonia, but no, Patagonia. North Face, do you know what North Face is? Do you have any clue what North Face is talking about? Do you have any idea which mountain? No, we don't know which mountain. But millions of people go and buy North Face because it's a brand that conveys certain qualities, and those qualities we want to have. And we can have those qualities not for $3,000 for the event fee. We can have those qualities for $30 or for $60 and get some of the same feelings that the person who climbs up the North Face of the Matterhorn in Switzerland. We can have some of the same feelings, a little bit of the same feelings they have for much less money and much less risk, of course. So what Mary Gaddens is really doing is building a brand by staging events that are extremely difficult, that get a lot of international attention. She gets tens of millions of dollars of free marketing because all of the networks, National Geographic and CNN and Discovery Channel, are chasing after her to film those events as she runs them. These are some examples. And so what she's doing with this brand that is being built over time, it takes a long time to build a brand, especially when you're building it for free. It takes a long time, and she has a store. And she's selling merchandise on her store. That's approved by, certified by, tested by, or has the name of Racing the Planet, which is gaining momentum, or gaining what we call cachet, reputation, as it develops over time. That's the store. And what are her results to date? And these are pretty fresh numbers. It's still a growing enterprise. It's a long way to go to be North Face. Actually, her goal, her objective, her role model or ideal is not North Face or Patagonia. Her ideal is Iron Man. Anybody know what Iron Man is? Ironman, the Ironman triathlon, they license to a Swiss watch company the Ironman name for $150 million a year. $150 million a year. So right now she has $4 million in revenues, not too bad, because she's built up with no investment whatsoever, no equity capital, no debt capital. This is all financed with her credit cards and with the fact that she gets 6 months in advance from every participant $3,000 because it's such an exciting thing for people to want, not for you, not for me, but for some people, it's such an exciting thing to do that they're willing to pay $3,000 6 months in advance. But Time Magazine has already rated them, along with some very amazing and well-known events, as #2 in the world as adventure events. Now let's go somewhere else entirely, to another example. This is an example of a company that's in a very different business called Educational Management Organization, or EMO. EMO, and SABIS is a global education management organization, which is built up around challenging several myths that most of us hold about what education is or must be. And one of those myths is that education has to be individualized. When I'm teaching you, it's different from when I'm teaching you. I have to have my education process tailored to each individual student. They say no. I'm not saying I agree. I'm saying this is their philosophy. Secondly, they challenge the myth that education must be nonprofit. They say no. To be sustainable, education has to be, public education, has to be a for-profit business. Thirdly, they challenge the myth that the more you invest per capita in education, the better the education is. And they say no. You have to be efficient. It's not the more you invest, it's the more results you get. And then fourth, they challenge the myth that learning by rote, or learning by memorizing, is bad. And they say no. It's possible to learn meaningful things by memorizing. And whether you agree with those challenges of myths or not, they have achieved results. Today they have 75,000 students. They run schools, public schools, in the United States. They run them like factories. They have customers. Their customers are the college admissions officers. The admissions officers who decide whether high school students get into college. Those are their customers. They have products. The products are the improved minds and characters of the students who come in kindergarten or first grade and go out in 12th grade. So they have products and they have customers. In the United States, the schools they've had for the longest have 100% college acceptance rates. So they're doing something right in terms of the way they define their mission. And they have public and private schools. They have over 75 schools. They have 75 students, about 75 schools in 16 different countries all around the world, including the UK, including Germany, including Romania, including the Middle East, including Afghanistan, including Kurdistan, and probably others that I've missed. That's their footprint. Where do you think they're located? By the way, I'll tell you later how much money they're making. Where do you think they're located? Where? In a war? In a war. Interesting answer. In a war. Okay. Any ideas about what country they might be located in? Chile? No. India? Maybe. Where else? Where? Finland? Where? Haiti? Haiti? Oh my goodness. That's They're looking in Lebanon. Isn't that obvious? Isn't that obvious? That they're located in Lebanon, 4 million people. ripped apart by war, Civil War in 1975, huge wars ever since. Isn't it obvious that they're located in Lebanon? Where they created a global business? And by the way, no equity capital investment whatsoever. They're doing about, those are the results. My estimate, they don't like to talk about it, but in public I got Carl Distani, the owner and one of the owners and the CEO, to say publicly approximately how much they're making. So I can say they're making about $100 million in their business and achieving good results. Fourth example. So we've been already to Mexico, we've been to Hong Kong, we've been to Lebanon, and now we're in Slovenia. Anybody here ever been to Slovenia? You have been to Slovenia. You said yes? You've been to Slovenia? Oh, you've heard about Slovenia. So have I. That's a way of keeping your passport very thin, is just to hear about them and not go there. Slovenia is a very small country next to Austria and Italy. It used to be part of Yugoslavia, about 2 million people population. And there's been a company called Studio Moderna. You've never heard of Studio Moderna. Studio Moderna has become a powerhouse in 22 countries in Central and Eastern Europe, including Russia and including Turkey. And they're a retailing powerhouse, but they've done retailing in a very different way. First of all, they took a type of selling channel that, until they took it, it was considered to be very bad. You probably have in Chile as well television shopping channels. When you're exercising in the gym, and then you see over and over again somebody selling a vacuum cleaner, or they're selling a bicycle, or some exercise equipment to make you beautiful and your stomach tight, and put cream on your face to make that look beautiful and everything. That's called direct response TV, DRTV. They started selling a product that they were sure they wouldn't be able to sell on a channel that they were sure they wouldn't be able to sell it on. The product was a piece of plastic, I should have brought an example, that Sandy Chesko, the founder, had brought to him by a friend of his. A friend of his came to him one day and said, "This will cure back pain." It's a strip of plastic that looks a little bit like a spine. You strap it on your back, and your back pain will go away. How many of you have back pain? Everybody has back pain from time to time. That's because we as a species on the globe are not yet fully evolved as people. We all suffer back pain because of the way our spines are built. And Sandy Chesko said, "That's stupid. That won't work." He said, "You know what, give me 10 samples. Give me 10 samples. And I'll send it to some friends of mine because I know lots of people with lower back pain." And he sent it to lots of these 10 people with lower back pain. Within 2 weeks, every single one of them called back and said, "I want another one for another friend of mine. Because it feels better. My back feels better." And Sandy Chesko, even though he didn't believe that this would work, said, "There must be a market there. How am I going to sell it?" At that time, in the mid-1990s in Slovenia, it turns out that the people who sold things over television, maybe this is true in Chile, I don't know, but in those days, the people who sold things over television were considered to be just a little bit higher than criminals. A little bit higher than criminals, about that high. Because what they promised was never true. When they delivered it, they delivered late. When you got it, it wouldn't work. And when you sent it back, they wouldn't refund your money. It's a great way of being in business for about 5 days. Right? And Sandy Chesko said, if I can turn that distrust into trust, using a product that a lot of people are skeptical about, I can build a name for myself. I can build a reputation in the retail market that'll be worth a lot. So he did two things already that he shouldn't have done. He took a product that didn't work, he thought, into a channel that couldn't sell, he thought, and turned those into advantages. He did one other thing that was very important. Television shopping in the United States is a huge, huge business. It's a multi-billion-dollar business in the United States. Not quite true in Western Europe, although that's increasing rapidly. And the way they do it in the United States is you have a marketing company and you outsource everything. You outsource the development of those horrible movies that you see when you're working in the gym. They outsource manufacturing of the product. They outsource the call centers, the third parties who will answer the telephone to take your order. They outsource the delivery, so-called order fulfillment. They even outsource the collection. But when those companies tried to come into Eastern Europe, they all failed. Because when you outsource something, the only control that you have over your suppliers is a legal contract. And a legal contract is only as good as your ability to enforce it. And in Eastern Europe, you probably have not heard of Eastern Europe as the gold standard of legal processes in the world. Probably it's not the gold standard of judicial systems. Probably. Okay? So when they came to Eastern Europe, they failed. Because they thought they could outsource everything. So Sandy did one other thing that was different. He insourced everything. Insourced. A new term, insourcing. So he built his own contact center. And he built his own delivery company. He built his own ability to make films, to make video content. He built his own stores so that people who wanted to actually touch the product could go to the store before they actually bought it. Okay, fast forward today. They have footprint in 22 markets. They're number one in all but one of those markets in the world. Number one in direct response TV. They have multiple selling channels. They sell through TV. They sell through internet. They have their own stores. They sell stores within stores. They do direct mail catalog marketing. It's what's called multi-channel retailing. And 300 million revenues, not so bad. Throughout the recession, they grew 30% per year. Throughout the recession, 100 of their own stores. And just recently, they did all this again without any equity capital at all. No equity investment until the beginning of this year. They raised a few tens of millions. I'm not allowed to say how much. Fifth example. So from Slovenia, let's get closer to home to a neighboring country called Brazil. Turns out that in Brazil, there's a company called Texas. Anybody here heard of Texas? The wind turbine company? You know about big wind turbines that take power from the wind and convert it to electricity? Texas is one of the two leading companies in the world to make wind turbine blades for big production quality wind farms. You know how big these are? You know how long these blades are? They're now up to 60 meters. Up to 60 meters. This company, Texas, is located just outside of Sao Paulo in a city called Sorocaba. Maybe somebody here has been to Sorocaba. And this is what they look like, and that's what I used to look like when I was 5 years younger. But I was the same size as I am now, and you can get an idea of how big these blades are. They're bigger than the largest animal that ever was on the face of the earth, the blue whale, which was up to 30 meters, and these were 37 meters, and now they're 50 and 60 meter long. What's really interesting about this company is that all of the raw materials come from the northern hemisphere, primarily Italy and the United States. It's special resins. All of the raw materials. And what's even more interesting is all of their products are sold to the Northern Hemisphere as well. They're importing all the raw materials, converting them into a value-added product, and selling them back into the same market where those raw materials came from. Isn't that strange? Doesn't that mean that something really interesting is happening in Sorocaba? Today they've become about a $500 million company with, again, no equity capital. That's a coincidence that only one of these ventures so far has raised equity capital. No investment, huge margins, tens of thousands of blades installed, #2 worldwide, etc. I'm going to give you 2 more examples. One of them is a company in Iceland. Anybody here been to Iceland? Only one person been to Iceland. How many people do you think live in Iceland? How many people do you think populate the island of Iceland? Just, a guess, think. Based on how much noise they're making, they're making a lot of noise in the world because of the economic meltdown they've suffered. There are 307,000 people in Iceland. That's like a slice of Concepcion, right? That's a small slice of Concepcion. That's the entire country. And there was a 29-year-old guy named Robert Westman who took over a very small family company that had developed a couple of generic drugs. You know what generic drugs are? The drugs that anybody can make. They're off-patent drugs. But they were failing. They were illiquid. And he persuaded the bank, mortgaging his house, he persuaded the bank to give him a 10 million euro loan. 7 years later, activists, which was then the company's name, and Robert Westman is now 37, almost 8 years later, are number 5 in the world. Today they're number 4 in the world. Number 4 in the world, 11,000 people, active in 40 countries, manufacturing in 26 countries, R&D in 4 countries, 3.5 billion euro in sales. And Robert Westman, just to say a few words about him, there's really nothing special about him. His high school friends say that they would never, ever have voted him to be the most likely to succeed in the class. Ordinary guy. Ordinary guy. What he had, and what he still has, is he has a drive to succeed. And by the way, he's middle class, was not wealthy. He's wealthy now. He was not wealthy. His father was a general manager of one of the hotels in Iceland. Nothing special. His mother ran a beauty salon. What he had, and still has, is leadership. What he has is an incredible ambition to succeed. What he has is the ability to persuade people that it's good to work with him. That working with him, they will have opportunity as well. Those are his assets. And so today, I already told you that, that's actually 3 years ago. Now it's even better that he's left the company. And then the last example. Finally. But I can see that most of you are awake. My big concern was that people back here would fall asleep. And so I'm coming back here to check. Because I've been a teacher for 35 years. And I know that people can fall asleep even though they look like they're awake. The last is a student of mine named Avi Shah from India, who created a company called Clutch Group in 2006, 2007, in the area of legal process outsourcing, in which legal work is outsourced to a third party. It turns out this is a really big industry. There are, if I remember correctly, about $250 billion a year are spent on legal services. $250 billion a year. Do you know what percentage of those are spent in the United States? I'm going to go up here. You know what percentage are spent in the United States of the $255 or so billion? 77%. We love lawyers in the United States. We love them so much that we pay huge fees to have them around. So about 200 billion of that is the United States. You know the second country in the world in legal spend, in the spend for legal services? The second. Do you think it's China? No way, China. Not Japan, not Chile, it's the UK. That's another 17% or so. So the two of them together account for 95% of the world's market in legal services. Two countries, it's amazing. So he said, I'm going to become the Microsoft of legal process outsourcing. This is a 20, and I think he was 28 or 29 years old at the time, said, I'm going to be Microsoft. Now his background is very interesting. Avi Shah, if you could see him, he's now 31 years old, and he looks 16. When he was 29 or 28 taking my class, he looked 15. When he really was 16, he was accepted in Texas in a university, Texas A&M University. You probably have heard of it. And he went from India, Ahmedabad, India, he went to Texas. And in the summer, came along the summer, he said, I got to make some money to pay for my education. This is not a fair ride. He called up his dad, he said, Dad, I need money, send me some money. And Dad said, no, I'm not going to send you money. Here's a telephone number. Call this person, you can get a job. His father had lived in Texas, in the South before. And so Abi called up this guy, and the guy with a very deep Southern accent said, yeah, come on over, let's meet. I can get you involved in my book-selling business. Abi said, great. By that time he was 17. He said, great, book-selling. That sounds good to me. It turns out that this guy sold Bibles. Sold Bibles in the southern part of the United States. He sold Bibles in the south of the United States. So Abi Shah got a job selling Bibles. Gujarati Hindu selling Bibles in the deep south in the United States. But it was worse than that. It was worse than that. When he said to the guy who's his boss, he said, okay, fine. I'm ready. Let's start selling. He said, okay. The guy said, buy the Bibles from me. And I said, what? He said, yeah. You buy the Bibles, and then you sell them. And your salary is the difference between what you sell and what you spend. Then they drew straws, and Abi and 3 other kids got an 18,000 population city in southern Alabama to sell Bibles that summer. So in the 100-degree heat, he learned how to sell Bibles door to door, buying and selling. The first year he lost a little money. He lost a couple $1,000s. For a student, that's a lot of money. Second year, he made $2,000. Third year, he made $7,000. The fourth summer, by the time he graduated, he made $13,000. Not bad for a summer's work. Abi Shah learned how to sell anything to anybody. I will come back to that in a second. Today, only 4 years after he graduated, number one in the world, $50 million of revenues, raised, that's actually outdated, more than $11 million in equity capital from private investors. And what Abi says, he's hired some of the best. They have 300 lawyers on the payroll. 300 lawyers. 100 in the United States. 200 in Bangalore, India. And what he says to his people, he's recruited some of the best people in the industry, he says, think big. We're going to be Microsoft. Think big. Pensar a grande. Thinking small is a crime. That's what he says. Thinking small is not bad, it's a crime. We're shooting for the stars. Okay, I applaud you on your patience as I have gone through these 7 examples, and now I want to step back and see what do we learn from these examples about entrepreneurship. What are our takeaways about what entrepreneurship is and isn't? And so I'd like to give you just a few of these takeaways, a few of these lessons. Is there a problem? Here's a problem. Let's go good. Okay? Actually, this is the Union of Professors. The Union of Professors allows me to take a 5-minute break now after 45 minutes. Okay? Continuamos. A few takeaways here. One, entrepreneurship. There are as many types of entrepreneurship out in the world as there are colors in the rainbow. There is an infinite variety of the types of entrepreneurship. You or I cannot predict what entrepreneurs are going to do. If you can set up a Racing the Planet on the one hand, a clutch group on the other hand, a television shopping in Slovenia on the third hand, a wind turbine blade manufacturer in Brazil on the other hand, it is impossible to predict what kind of entrepreneurship is going to succeed when or where. But the variety is infinite. The only limit to the type of entrepreneurship that can exist is the limit of our imagination. That's number one. It's not just about people with long hair and sneakers in a garage in Silicon Valley making the next little widget. That's one frequency. That's one color in the rainbow. It's a very nice color. It's a great color in the rainbow. But it's only one small color in the entire rainbow of entrepreneurship that is out there. It's infinite. Secondly, entrepreneurship is ubiquitous. That means it exists everywhere. There is no place in the world, and I've been now studying entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship in 30 countries in the world, including countries that claim they have no entrepreneurship at all. And when you dig beneath the sands of Saudi Arabia, or in the jungles of Colombia, or elsewhere where people say that we don't have enough entrepreneurs, you find them, they're there. It may be that it manifests itself, that it exhibits itself in different ways. Sometimes entrepreneurship even manifests itself in ways that are antisocial. One of the greatest entrepreneurs in the world, I'm sorry to say, was a cocaine drug dealer named Pablo Escobar, who was listed by Forbes in 1991 or 1992 as the 7th wealthiest person in the world, listed by Forbes. Imagine how clever, innovative, and entrepreneurial he was. He developed distribution channels, he had product development, he had chemistry labs, not just to make cocaine, he had chemistry labs to figure out how to mix the cocaine in rubber, transport it, not inside, but as part of the tires, take it to factories in the United States, melt them down, extract the cocaine out of it, and sell it in the United States. Just imagine if that had been channeled in positive ways. Imagine if all that entrepreneurial energy and spirit is channeled in positive ways. By the way, there's a great book that just came out by his brother, called The Accountant's Story. He was the accountant. Fascinating story. Third, entrepreneurship can be done by anyone, anytime, and at any age. A lot of times we think that the typical entrepreneur is a student who just started shaving a few days before and has some crazy idea and goes out and starts a company. Sometimes that's true. There's amazing things about students. One of the most amazing things about students is they don't know that certain things are impossible. And so they do them. But it turns out, for example, in the United States in this recession, more companies are started by people in their 50s. It's not bounded by age. I have a case on a 71-year-old entrepreneur, now he's 80, bless his soul, who created 54 companies in his life. The last one he created when he was in his late 60s. Of the 54, 1/3 failed. 2/3 were successful. 4, entrepreneurship, although innovation is frequently part of entrepreneurship, and entrepreneurship is frequently part of innovation, it's not necessary. It's not an inherent part of being an entrepreneur. Even though I think it's really important not to be misunderstood by Babson, Chile. Innovation is really important, but it's not absolutely necessary. Cinemax, the only innovation, remember, the only innovation that they had was lime juice instead of butter. Activists, generic pharmaceuticals. There's absolutely no innovation in generic pharmaceuticals by definition. By definition. All the innovation has been sucked out of it. The patents are no valid anymore. Does that mean there's no entrepreneurship in the generics business? Tremendous entrepreneurship. Expertise. Expertise is also a good thing. It helps, but it's not absolutely necessary. Avi Shah was not a lawyer, yet he's created a leading legal processes outsourcing firm in the world. And he's not a lawyer. I don't know if you know the X Prize. You probably have heard about the X Prize. X Prize in the United States. It's a movement to provide huge amounts of money to people who solve really complicated problems. Just 2 months ago, an X Prize of $5 million was given for the development of a new car. The car had to get 100 miles per gallon, traditional engine, 100 miles per gallon, gasoline engine. It had to have 4 passengers. It had to be safe, and it had to be scalable in manufacturing. And a company won $5 million. There were 3 years that won $5 million. 30-person team. Who was the entrepreneur? A real estate developer. And they completely thought from the beginning about what a car is and what makes it work. You see it, it's called Edison 2. Google it, YouTube it. It's a fascinating thing. It requires 8 pounds of pressure to move it. 8 pounds of pressure. That means if you go like that, the car moves. That's a car moving. Number 5. Entrepreneurship is inherently about dreaming to do something big. Pensar grande. Now this is an important statement. It may sound obvious, but microenterprise and entrepreneurship are 2 different things. They're 2 completely different things. That doesn't mean that one is good and one is bad. Microenterprise is important to alleviate poverty, but it does not contribute at all to economic growth and development. None. What contributes to economic growth and development are the entrepreneurs who dream big, who have high ambitions, high aspirations, and are never, ever satisfied. Never satisfied with what they've accomplished. That drives job creation, wealth creation, etc., which I'll talk a little bit more in a minute. That's inherent in the process of entrepreneurship. My grandfather came to the United States when he was 2 years old, got a 3rd grade education, and became a wallpaper hanger and painter. And then he had a store. He set up a store to sell equipment to other painters and wallpaper hangers. He was an entrepreneur, but a micro-entrepreneur. His dream was that my father would get a real job. His dream that my father would get a real education. My father became a theoretical physicist. A theoretical physicist. He didn't become another entrepreneur. Entrepreneurs want their kids to be entrepreneurs, and their kids do it naturally anyway. Sixth, it's not about risk. There is risk in entrepreneurship. But people who become entrepreneurs make a choice among different risks. I hear in societies all around the world, not just here, not just in BioBio, not just in Concepcion, not just in Chile, that people don't want to take risks. I don't think there's anything, first of all, more inherently risky about the entrepreneurial choice than about the choice to take a salaried job. It's a different set of risks. It's the risk, on the one hand, of putting some money and losing it, maybe being ashamed of failure, maybe being embarrassed at creating expectations, maybe losing opportunity. That's on the one hand. But there's also a risk of working in a salary job, of working for someone who's stupider than you are, of working for someone who takes your ideas and gets a bonus for them, and working for someone or a company which makes arbitrary decisions about whether your employment continues, even though you may be a great performer and you may make a lot of money for the company. When it comes to laying people off, they lay people off. Is that less risky? I don't think so. I think it's a different set of risks. Next, entrepreneurship can thrive in great adversity. It does not require a perfect environment in order to be successful. To be self-sustaining, it requires an environment that's conducive to entrepreneurship. But there's a lot of opportunity in adversity. And a lot of entrepreneurship, of the high potential, high achievement entrepreneurship occurs even though the situation is bad. I'm struck, by the way, by what the Intendente says about this terrible terremoto being an opportunity to do something new. There's adversity here. It's not something we welcome, but if it's there, it can be a great opportunity. And that, for example, Cinemex, the currency crash. Has anybody here been in a currency crash? I've been in 3. I've been in 3 currency crashes in my life. It's a horrible feeling when the next day, all the smiles are, in one day, the smiles on people's faces are wiped off. They don't know what to do. I've been in so many currency crashes that I think you can make a lot of money by watching where I go and shorting the currency. It can thrive in great adversity. In fact, the currency crash in Mexico saved the company. It gave them the opportunity that they needed. And then finally, entrepreneurship is inherently what I call contrarian. It's inherently about doing something that somebody else thinks is a stupid thing to do, or a worthless thing to do, or an impossible thing to do. In fact, if you don't have at least one really smart person whose opinion you respect, who thinks that what you're doing is either worthless, impossible, or stupid, your idea is probably not a big one. All the big ideas in the world, all the big ideas, have their detractors, the people who think they're critics, who think that they're not good. Think about, I'll give you an example. One of my students, 3 years ago, what was happening in the automotive industry 3 years ago? The automotive industry was caving in completely, at least in the United States and worldwide as well. And just as it was caving in, one of my students did what? He set up a car manufacturing company. Oh God, a car manufacturing company. And today they're succeeding. Because he did it in a different way. He said the reason that all the General Motors and Chryslers and Fords are collapsing, there's a reason for it. And I can understand that reason, and I can do it differently. And the first cars that he's making are already available. They're rolling off. He's got hundreds of orders. They're rolling off. It's not an electric car. It's not a green car. It's not a clean car. It has green elements to it. It's a car that's made in a completely different way than cars are typically made. I won't go into it now. That's an idea that some people thought was both worthless and stupid. Sandy Chesko, with his back product. A worthless product that became a huge business. So inherently, entrepreneurship is doing things that when everyone is going to the right, the entrepreneur looks for the opportunities on the left. When everybody's going up, the entrepreneur looks for the opportunities going down. Because that's where the opportunities are. There's a saying in Chinese, that there's no fish in clear water. You can only catch big fish in murky water. Because in the clear water, all the fish are gone. They've been caught. Well, I have a lot more to say, but I'm not going to say it, because I think it's a good opportunity for us to have a conversation for the few minutes remaining. And I'm happy to make these slides available, but I think it's a good thing to take these ideas and discuss them. Maybe you disagree. Maybe you have your own examples. Maybe you have questions. But the real fundamental question is, if this is entrepreneurship, how do we create a system, an ecosystem? How do we enhance and strengthen the ecosystem so that we have more Mary Gavin's? Not one, but 10. That we have more Abishas, not one but 10. That we have more Sandy Cheskos, not one but 10. There is nothing inherent about your situation here in BioBio that prevents you, nothing that prevents you for having this kind of entrepreneurship, except attitudes, except what exists between people's ears. Should we open up for some Q&A now? We will now open this up for some Q&A. We have until 1 o'clock, if I understand correctly. Is that correct? And the way this is going to work is that there's a microphone, and if you'd like to ask a question or make a comment, raise your hand. And ask it in Spanish, even if you speak English, because it will be translated to everybody else. And if you don't ask any questions, I'm going to punish you with more lecturing. No? Hello? One minute, please. Say something. Okay. Okay.
Hola. Muchas gracias por tu inspiración. Okay. Quiero hacerte una pregunta muy precisa, que tiene que ver mucho con la posibilidad de entender cuál es nuestra identidad para el mundo. ¿Qué conocías antes de venir para acá? ¿O cuál era nuestra identidad en tu persona respecto a esta región? ¿Qué conocías de nosotros? ¿Qué éramos para ti antes de venir acá?
That's an easy question. Very little. I do read a lot, and I read the history of Chile, and the economic history of Chile. I've read that. But there's nothing like seeing. Seeing is believing. And so the last 4 days I've had a chance to meet with a lot of people and also travel around and see some of the devastation, but also some of the opportunities that exist here. But what's behind your, I think there's something behind your question. Maybe you have something more behind that you'd like to say.
Sí, siento que para pensar en grande, esa invitación a no ser criminales y pensar en pequeño, hay algo de nuestra propia creencia en lo que somos para poder convertirnos en una oferta global, para poder salir al mundo y dejar de ser umbilicales en nuestra manera de pensar. Y de alguna forma, nuestra identidad, de alguna manera u otra, ya está en las conversaciones del mundo. Algo sabe el mundo de nosotros. Me interesa mucho conocer acerca de eso, porque me atrae a lanzarme con esa distinción.
I agree. Yeah.
Hola. Quiero hacer una pregunta. Tengo una opinión respecto a por qué muchos de nosotros no pensamos en grande. Y veo que en los casos que presentaste, me imaginé que en cada uno de ellos, de esos jóvenes que emprendieron, sus padres no estaban preocupados de financiarlos hasta que terminaran sus estudios. Nosotros aquí en Chile, especialmente en esta región, tenemos una mala costumbre de eternizar el lazo entre el hijo y los padres, más allá de lo aconsejable. Y en ese camino yo creo que se matan las grandes ideas y se cultiva una comodidad que es bastante incómoda para emprender. La pregunta es, ¿crees que la relación del emprendimiento y el tipo de familias que tenemos es un tema importante a cambiar?
Yes, I think that I don't know the specifics of what you're describing, but in general, the culture of entrepreneurship is very important. The culture of entrepreneurship that influences how people feel about risk. It influences how people feel about making mistakes or failing. You know, failure, I like to say, a failure is only a mistake that you don't learn from. Mistakes are natural in entrepreneurship. Every entrepreneur makes mistakes. If you don't learn from your mistakes, it's a failure. If you learn from mistakes, it's a great success, because then you're smart. I see you smiling, I'm sure you made many mistakes, right? Only one mistake? Every day you make mistakes. So the culture of how you treat mistakes, and also the culture or the norms which encourage or discourage people from creating wealth. There are some cultures in which wealth creation is considered to be a bad thing. But these are changeable. These you can influence. It's not only because of the closeness in the family, but it's also because of the message that people are getting from society, from the media, from the leaders, from the pop stars, from the politicians. If the leaders give a different message, the norms of the society, the culture will change. Will change.
¿Aló? Buenas tardes. ¿Acá? Buenas tardes.
Stand up, please.
Ok. Profesor, buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Ángelo Bustos. Soy profesor de español. Y bueno, mi pregunta tiene que ver con la formación de capital humano, sobre todo en una región devastada. Con un grupo de estudiantes y profesores de la Universidad de Concepción estamos desarrollando un programa que se llama Profesores en Terreno, que busca, bueno, en este momento reforzar, ¿cierto? Las materias, reforzar, ¿cierto? El sistema educativo regional. Ahora, nosotros como profesores vemos que el sistema educativo regional está colapsado. Le regalo una imagen, decimos que es como un edificio, ¿cierto? Después del terremoto colapsado, y quizá podríamos pensar en demolerlo y hacerlo de nuevo. En ese contexto, ¿qué importancia le da a usted, sobre todo en la formación de capital humano, para reconstruir una región, el e-learning, b-learning, el mobile learning y bueno, todas las tecnologías que se pueden aplicar digamos, en este trabajo? Muchas gracias.
Well, education is an absolutely essential part of the entrepreneurship ecosystem. In fact, research and entrepreneurship education is also, can be and should be an essential part of the education system. And I'll give you an example, and I think there should be plenty of investment in education. I think it's absolutely top priority, human capital. But let me give you a very interesting story. In the United States, there is a group called the National Foundation for Teaching Entrepreneurship, which has created a curriculum, teaching lesson for public high schools. And it's taught in many, many public high schools. Entrepreneurship. They have textbooks, they have exercises, they train teachers. We can bring them to Chile. They'd love to come to Chile. And Harvard did some research on 4 schools in Boston. 2 of them have the entrepreneurship education. 2 of them did not have the entrepreneurship education. And they compared the 2. As you'd expect, the students who had the entrepreneurship classes were more entrepreneurial. They had a higher chance or a higher probability of actually starting a business. That's not very surprising. But what is perhaps more surprising is that their grades in other subjects improved as well. They became better students in math because they had a reason to learn math, to count things, to calculate various parts of the cash flow or financial forecasts. So they became better students in math. They became better students in English because they had a reason to communicate. They had to write marketing brochures. They had to write letters to customers. They had to send out invoices. So they became better in English as well. And the third thing is they became better citizens. They became more involved in school activities. They became more involved in after-school voluntary programs. And fourthly, they developed more confidence in themselves. They developed more belief that if there's something that they want to accomplish, they can accomplish it. So it's important to invest in education of all kinds. I think math, science, languages are critical and should be extremely high priority. But in addition, I think entrepreneurship or financial literacy, even at a young age, can help make the other curricula, the other classes, more meaningful and more valuable for students as well.
Gallego Barrubias de la Universidad del Desarrollo. Quería hacer una reflexión distinta. Venimos llegando de Israel en un viaje que se hizo con varios empresarios académicos y gente también del gobierno, también del gobierno. Y le escuchamos a Shimon Pérez una frase que fue maravillosa. Dice: nosotros en Israel no tenemos ningún recurso natural, solo vivimos rodeados de un elefante, por así llamarlo, dormimos con el enemigo todos los días. Somos 7 millones de personas. Por lo tanto, lo único que tenemos es el talento de 7 millones de personas. Y nuestra concepción de país, todo lo que hacemos es para exportar. Nos miramos desde Israel hacia la exportación del mundo. El caso de Concepción es muy similar. De verdad, Concepción, a diferencia también de algunas cosas que hemos escuchado, yo siento que ha sido y tiene una gran industria. Empresas forestales mundiales, Arauco, CMPC, empresas pesqueras muy importantes, empresas de hierro muy importantes. O sea, es una industria que se ha desarrollado muy fuerte. Pero se produjo una desintegración entre estas grandes empresas que se instalaron en la década del 70, en la década del 80, con las pymes y quizás con los proveedores pymes. O sea, la pregunta es: Concepción debiera tender a atraer nuevos desarrollos y por tanto ser fuerte en traer y dar las condiciones para que nuevas empresas grandes o medianas lleguen, o debiéramos impulsar el desarrollo desde proveedores a estas empresas grandes que ya están construidas.
Okay. So, by the way, I lived in Israel for 22 years. And I was actually part of that. And right now I'm actually advising Paris's team for what the next step is. So I'm happy to talk about that. It's one of my favorite topics. But I don't think it's an either-or question. In other words, I don't think it's either bringing in big companies or encouraging small companies. In fact, I think big and small companies are part of the same ecosystem. Small companies, entrepreneurs, need customers. And the best customers they have are customers that are bigger than they are. Because customers that are smaller than they are don't buy anything. But not very much of it. So the opportunity for young ventures to interact with large companies is extremely important. They can help them be more professional. They can help them define innovative services and products. They can be their customers, and they can be their sales channels. They can even be their investors. So I think they really, really need each other a lot. Well, certainly the small companies need the big companies. I think the big companies also need the small companies. The big companies need the small companies to get the innovative services and products, to get the new ideas, because the small companies are more clever and more flexible and fast-moving. So they really need each other. The trick or the challenge is to try and make the big companies more available to the small companies, to engage them in dialogue, to engage them in conversations early on when the small companies may not be very well developed and just have some initial ideas or initial products. That's the challenge. So I think you need to train the bigger companies that come here, that are operating here, to work with smaller suppliers and encourage them. At the same time, you need to help, of course you need to help the smaller companies interact with, to step up their level of quality, documentation, labeling, packaging, customer service, and so on and so forth. By the way, I recently published a blog in Forbes just on that topic, and I'm happy to send you the link.
La última pregunta para ir cerrando. Teníamos un señor atrás.
Hola, buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Salazar de la Universidad Católica. ¿De qué forma ayudamos a las culturas que son diferentes a tomar estas herramientas de emprendimiento para que ellos puedan, de alguna forma, valga la redundancia, emprender? ¿Cuál ha sido tu experiencia en ello? Sobre todo, en este caso, con los pueblos originarios donde tú estás.
So I'm not 100%, I think I understood the question. And it's true that all around the world there are very different cultures and there are very different attitudes towards entrepreneurship. And in some countries they don't even have good words for the term entrepreneur. And I believe that the term emprendedor is a new term in Spanish that in Spain has now entered the culture, but I was told when I was in Spain just a couple of months ago that it is not yet approved officially by the Academy. And it conveys something very different from the word empresario, I think. It means something else, emprendedor, empresario. And there's some cultures which don't even have a word for entrepreneur, and if they do, it's not a very good word. It's not a very nice word. So I think language is just one small piece. I think that because entrepreneurship really is part of the human spirit, it's a way of being creative, of expressing yourself. That it exists everywhere. It comes out in different ways, and you have to bring it out in different ways in every country. In some cases, for example, in Scandinavia, it's much more inclusive, and there's much more emphasis on work-life balance in Scandinavia. The entrepreneur is not someone who works 80 hours a week, whereas in other countries, such as Israel, where if you don't work 70, 80 hours a week, you're considered to be not a hard worker. So it comes out in different ways, but it exists everywhere. And I think the real challenge for all of us is how do we encourage it? How does leadership, how does the media, how do the educators, how do the cultural figures, how do you encourage people to dream big and to take risks?
Muy bien, sabemos que hay muchas consultas, seguramente quisiéramos pedir un aplauso para Daniel.